November 22nd, 1900, Volume 4. Jesus puts himself in the place of the heart and tells her what food he wants from her. My adorable Jesus continues to make himself seen. This morning, having received communion, I saw him in my interior, as well as our two hearts so identified with each other as to seem to be one. My most sweet Jesus told me, "Today I have decided to give you back not your heart, but myself in its place." At that moment, I saw Jesus placing himself in that point where the heart is, and from within Jesus, I received respiration, and I felt the beating of his heart. How happy I felt living in this position. After this he added, "Since I myself have taken the place of the heart, it is appropriate for you to have food always ready to nourish me. This food will be my will, and everything through which you will mortify yourself, and of which you will deprive yourself for love of me." But who can say all that passed between Jesus and me in my interior? I believe it is better to keep silent, otherwise I feel as if I would ruin it, since my tongue is not well refined to be able to speak of graces so great which the Lord has given to my soul. There is nothing left for me but to thank the Lord, who has looked upon a soul so miserable and sinful. November 22nd, 1901, Volume 4. The self carries the mark of all ruin, while without the self, everything is safety. After going through most bitter days of tears, of privation, and of silence, my poor heart can bear no more. The torment of being outside of my center, God, is so great that I am continuously battered amid dense waves of a fierce storm in a state of strong violence, such that I suffer death at each moment. And what's more, I cannot die. As I was in this position, he made himself seen for a little while and told me, "My daughter, when the soul does the will of someone else in everything, it is said that she has trust in that person. Therefore she lives from someone else's volition, and not from her own. In the same way, when the soul does my will in everything, I say that she has faith. So divine will and faith are branches produced by the same trunk. And since faith is simple, faith and divine will produce a third branch, that of simplicity. And here is how the soul comes to reacquire the characteristics of a dove in everything. Don't you want then to be my dove?" On another occasion, another day, he told me, "My daughter, pearls, gold, gems, the most precious things, are kept in good custody inside some casket, and with double locks. What do you fear, then, if I keep you in good custody inside the casket of holy obedience, most safe custody, in which not one, but two keys keep the door well closed, so as to preclude the entrance of any thief, and even of a shadow of any defect? Only the self carries the mark of all ruin, but without the self, everything is safety." November 22nd, 1902, Volume 4. Luisa is about to die, but obedience is opposed. On November 22nd, as I kept feeling ill again, Blessed Jesus came and told me, "My beloved, do you want to come?" And I, "Yes, don't leave me on this earth any longer." And he, "Yes, I want to content you once and for all." And as he was saying this, I felt my stomach and my throat close in such a way that nothing could enter any more. I could barely pull in a breath, feeling suffocated. Then I saw that blessed Jesus called the angels and said to them, "Now that the victim is coming, suspend the fortresses, so that the peoples may do what they want." And I, "Lord, who are they?" And he, "They are the angels that keep the cities. As long as the cities are assisted by the fortress of divine protection communicated to the angels, they can do nothing. But once this protection is removed due to the grave sins they commit, and they are left on their own, they can make revolution and any sort of evil." I felt placid, and seeing myself alone with my dear Jesus and abandoned by all creatures, I thanked the Lord from my heart, and I prayed him to deign not to let anyone come to me to bother me. While I was in this position, my sister came, and seeing me ill, she sent for the confessor, who managed by force of obedience to have me open my throat a little bit. And then he came out giving me the obedience not to die. Poor is the one who has to deal with creatures. Not knowing the depth of all the pains and torments of a poor soul, they add greater sorrows to her pains. And it is easier to obtain compassion, help, and relief from God than from creatures. Rather, it seems that they get more incited. But may the Lord be always blessed, who disposes everything for his glory and for the good of souls. November 22nd, 1921, Volume 13. The acts done in the divine will are light. The pain that most pierced Jesus in his passion was pretense. Continuing in my usual state and keeping vigil almost all night, my thought flew very often to my prisoner Jesus, and he made himself seen in thick darkness, such that I could feel his labored breath, the touch of his person, but I could not see him. So I tried to fuse myself in his most holy will, doing my usual acts of compassion and reparation. And a ray of light, brighter than the sun, came out from within my interior and was reflected on the face of Jesus. At that ray, his most holy face was lightened, and as daylight arose, darkness was dispelled, and I was able to cling to his knees. Then he told me, "My daughter, the acts done in my will are daylight for me. And if man with his sins surrounds me with darkness, these acts, more than solar rays, defend me from darkness, surround me with light, and take me by the hand to make me known to creatures for who I am. This is why I love so much one who lives in my will, because in my will she can give me everything. She defends me from everyone. And I feel like giving her everything, enclosing in her all the goods which I should give to all the others. Suppose that the sun had a reason, and that plants were rational, and of their own will they refused the light and heat of the sun, and did not love to fecundate and produce fruits, and that only one plant would receive the light of the sun with love, and would want to give to the sun all the fruits which the other plants do not want to produce. Would it not be fair that the sun, withdrawing its light from all the other plants, would pour all of its light and heat upon that plant? I think so. Now, what does not happen to the sun, because it does not have a reason, can happen between the soul and myself." After he said this, he disappeared. Then he came back and added, "My daughter, the pain which pierced me the most during my passion was the affectation of the Pharisees. They faked justice, but they were the most unjust. They faked sanctity, regularity, order, and they were the most perverted, outside of any rule, and in full disorder. And while they pretended to honor God, they were honoring themselves, their self-interest, their own comfort. Therefore light could not enter into them, because their fake manners were closing the doors to it, and pretense was the key which, closing them to death with double locks, blocked obstinately even a few glimmers of light, to the point that Pilate, idolatrous, found more light than the very Pharisees, because all he did and said did not start from pretense, but at most from fear. I feel more drawn to the most perverted sinner, but not false, than to those who are good but false. Oh, how disgusted I am by one who apparently does good, pretends to be good, prays, but nurses evil and self-interest inside. And while his lips are praying, his heart is far away from me, and in the very act of doing good he is thinking about how to satisfy his brutal passions. Therefore, a man who is false in the good which he apparently does and says is incapable of giving light to others, since he has closed the doors to it. Therefore they act as incarnate devils, who many times attract men under the appearance of good. In seeing this good, men let themselves be drawn in, but when they feel most secure, they make them fall into graver sins. Oh, how much safer are the temptations under appearance of sin than those under appearance of good. In the same way, it is safer to deal with perverted people than with good people, but false. How much poison do they not hide? How many souls do they not poison? If it wasn't for pretenses and all made themselves known for what they are, the root of evil would be removed from the face of the earth, and all would be disillusioned. November 22nd, 1925, Volume 18. The Great Good which the Soul Receives by Living in the Supreme Will. The acts done in it form a celestial dew which covers all creatures. I was fusing myself in the holy divine volition according to my usual way, trying as much as is possible for me to embrace everything in my little lap, in order to place my little I love you, my thank you, my adoration, my I bless you, upon all created things, with the power of the supreme Fiat, so as to keep company with this supreme will, which is spread in the creation with so much love. But while I was doing this, I thought to myself, what does the soul receive by living in this celestial atmosphere of the supreme will? At that moment, my lovable Jesus came out from within my interior, and clasping me all to himself, told me, "My daughter, do you want to know what the soul receives by living in my will? She receives the union of the supreme will with hers, and in this union my will takes on the task of giving the parity with itself to the will of the soul. So my will is holy, is pure, is light, and it wants to make the soul equal to itself in holiness, purity, and light. And if the task of the soul is to live in my will, the task of mine is to give my likeness to the human will in a perfect way. And this is why I want you always in it, so that it may not only keep you in its company, but it may make you grow in its likeness. And this is why I feed you the food of its knowledges, to make you grow in a divine manner and with its perfect likeness. And it is for this reason that my will wants you always with itself, wherever it operates, that it may give you the act of its operating, the value which the operating of a divine will contains, and you may receive it." On hearing this, I said, "My love, your will is everywhere. So everyone lives in it, yet not everyone receives this likeness. And Jesus immediately added, "And what does this have to do with it, my daughter? It is true that all live in my will, because there is not one point in which my will is not present. But almost all live in it as foreigners or as mercenaries, others by force, others as rebels. These live in it but do not know it, nor do they know its goods. On the contrary, they are the usurpers of that very life which they have received from my will. Each act of these is a dissimilarity that they acquire between their will and that of their Creator. It is the confirmation of their poverty, of their passions, and of the thick darkness with which they fill themselves, in such a way that they are blind to all that is heaven. In order to reach the parity with my will, one cannot live as a foreigner, but as the owner. One must look at all things as one's own, and have all the care for them. Therefore, it is necessary to know them, in order to love them and possess them. As beautiful and good as something may be, if it is not totally one's own, one does not love it, does not esteem it, does not use all the care which it deserves. One always has a cold eye in looking at it, and a heartbeat without life for loving it. On the other hand, if that something is one's own, one is all eyes to look at it, and all heart to love it. One esteems it and reaches the point of making of it an idol for his heart. That something in itself has not become more beautiful. What it was, it still is. It has not gone through any change. It is the person who went through a change by acquiring it and keeping it as something exclusively his own. This is what the soul receives by living in my will. She receives it as her own. She possesses it. She feels its celestial aura, its life of heaven, the likeness of the one who created her, and as she lives in my will, she feels studded with the reflections of her Creator. In everything she feels the power of that Fiat which gives life to all things, and in the sea of goods which she possesses, she says, "How happy I am! The will of God is mine. I possess it, and I love it." Therefore all the acts done in my will diffuse over all, and all take part in them. See when at daybreak you were saying, "May my mind rise in the supreme will, in order to cover all the intelligences of creatures with your will, so that all may rise in it. And in the name of all I give you the adoration, the love, the submission of all created intelligences." While you were saying this, a celestial dew poured upon all creatures, covering them, to bring the requital of your act to all. Oh, how beautiful it was to see all creatures covered by this celestial dew which my will formed, symbolized by the night dew which can be found in the morning over all plants, to embellish them, to fecundate them, and to prevent those which are about to wither from drying up. With its celestial touch, it seems to place a touch of life in order to make them vegetate. How enchanting is the dew at daybreak! But much more enchanting and beautiful is the dew of the acts which the soul forms in my will. And yet my love and my life, with all this dew, creatures do not change. And Jesus, if the night dew does so much good to the plants, unless it falls on dry wood, severed from the plants, or upon things which contain no life, such that even though they remain covered with dew and somehow embellished, the dew is as though dead for them, and as the sun rises, little by little it withdraws it from them. Much more good does the dew which my will makes descend upon souls, unless they are completely dead to grace. And yet, by the vivifying virtue it possesses, Even if they are dead, it tries to infuse in them a breath of life. But all others, some more, some less, according to their dispositions, feel the effects of this beneficial dew. End of November 22nd. Happy Thanksgiving and Fiat.